Thanks for having me here today on Infra Day. Battery Park City has a history of environmental leadership, cutting-edge green building standards, organic parks maintenance, and responsible waste management practices. But today's challenges necessitate further action. I'm looking forward to talking to you about the Battery Park City Authority's efforts to adapt our neighborhood, Battery Park City, to a changing climate and beyond Battery Park City as well. And we're doing so in coordination with a wide range of partners, many of whom I'm delighted are here today. So if you take a look at this picture of Battery Park City's beginnings from a few decades ago, it's worth remembering that Battery Park City was literally built into the water, as you can see here, expanding the shoreline to create a new neighborhood where dilapidated piers were once crumbling into the Hudson River. Our work to protect this neighborhood is now another chapter in the development of this community. Battery Park City is vulnerable as a coastal community, even more so now that storms are getting more severe and frequent. Here's a picture of Rockefeller Park in the northern portion of our neighborhood during Superstorm Sandy. But it's important to note that we are not planning for a storm that happened in the past. We have to plan for worse than Superstorm Sandy. If you look to the left on this map where you can kind of see the black dotted line, that's the Battery Park City floodplain. So our segment that we're working on can protect 120 buildings and about 14,000 homes, as well as vital infrastructure, cultural resources, workplaces, schools, public parks, and more. Along our esplanade, and I hope you will visit, are light poles that we've now painted blue to the level of potential flooding that we are working to protect against. And so the blue, which goes to the level of flooding, now ranges from 6.5 feet to 13.5 feet from the ground, depending on where you're standing in the neighborhood. We created this public education initiative to help make the threat of climate change and the need for our actions in this neighborhood even clearer. At the Authority, we've made a lot of recent progress on climate adaptation in terms of restoration after Sandy, but also planning, design, legislation, and financing milestones. There's, of course, been a strong focus on flood protection measures for the neighborhood, but our work also includes sustainability efforts to combat climate change more broadly. That's why we've developed a sustainability plan that puts us on a path towards carbon neutrality by 2050, with targets for energy efficiency, water conservation, waste reduction, and site management. The Authority's resiliency projects are part of the Lower Manhattan Coastal Resiliency Initiative, and our work is in close coordination with the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice. We're adopting the same design criteria, including flood elevations, as the East Side Coastal Resiliency Project and the Brooklyn Bridge Manhattan Coastal Resiliency Project, for example, and together these projects will all form a critical link to protect Lower Manhattan from future severe storms. And even though Battery Park City is a little corner in the borough of Manhattan, it doesn't necessarily lessen the amount of coordination we have to do to get these kinds of projects done. And so we have to work with numerous city and state agencies, the community board and other stakeholder organizations, other local entities. And we can't do this without, everyone's guidance and support. And so we've worked hard to balance the urgency of resiliency with the importance of including community voices. And that has meant for us conducting or participating in over 50 public sessions to date, talking about our resiliency projects and getting input from stakeholders that has informed our designs in meaningful ways. So let's dive in a little bit more into those resiliency projects. There's three that I'm going to walk through pretty quickly. First is the ball fields resiliency project, which we completed earlier this year. And this creates a protective system around the ball fields and also the adjacent community center. And we started there because it's a geographic low point where we received the worst damage during Hurricane Sandy. And now we're moving on to bigger projects as we speak. This is the South Resiliency project where we have started site work, which provides perimeter storm protection along the southern boundary of Battery Park City and continuing into lower Manhattan. And so it starts at the Museum of Jewish Heritage to the north, winds its way through Wagner Park, Pier A, and into the historic Battery. And we are using a range of measures, but we focus on passive measures wherever possible. So I'll give you a preview of what this newly resilient area will look like. At the top of the project area, we have a system of flood walls along the Museum of Jewish Heritage that you can see here. They're glass-topped to maintain open views from within the museum, and as a result, they nearly disappear into the landscape. This rendering depicts a more resilient Wagner Park, elevated over a buried flood wall with new universal access, a carbon-neutral pavilion, rain capture infrastructure, and enhanced public space as a result. And here you're looking at the Pier A inlet, which will be designed to facilitate a more effective natural edge at the request of the local community and in keeping with waterfront edge design guidelines. We've added this to the area so that there's an opportunity for park visitors to engage more closely with the water. Our goal is to provide protection without sacrificing public use and even enhancing it, as you can see here with the new multi-level design structure at Pier A Plaza, which will also be a protective mechanism. And then finally, this project extends into the Battery, as I had mentioned, with passive measures seen here with the berm trailing off at the end of the bike lane as it reaches the second high point in the system. We've also worked closely with DEP on a range of interior drainage improvements as well. Now I'll talk a little bit about the Northwest Resiliency Project, which provides perimeter storm protection around our northern boundary and along the Hudson River side of Battery Park City. We've organized this project into 7 segments, which we refer to as reaches. Design work is at the early stage, and there are a lot of factors to take into account. And so I'll talk about that briefly as kind of a preview of where we're headed. So in Reach 1, you're looking at this map. This is the northern edge of Battery Park City, looking at 9A and into Tribeca. And so, one of the things we have to account for is how we cross 9A in providing the protective flood barrier. And here, still on the north, but just moving a little west, you can see Stuyvesant High School on the right side of the screen. And there's a very narrow esplanade. And so we're contemplating widening it in order to give us room for both pedestrian use while also providing protective measures. And as we wind our way around to the western side of Battery Park City, here we're looking at Rockefeller Park. And what we're contemplating here is taking advantage of the existing garden walls and park walls to help serve as the protective system. And as we move down, we have some more changes, and one of the complexities that we're working on now is how we work with the ferry terminal that's just outside 300 VC Street, particularly during construction, which will disrupt that area and egress. And then here we're at North Cove Marina, just outside of Brookfield Place. And so we're looking at what we can do at the water's edge while also being mindful of the public space, the commercial space, the restaurants, and also the path tubes that are running underneath. Small details. And then in Reach 6, we have to take into account all of the residential buildings that are very close to the water's edge. And so we'll have to be very careful with the flood alignment against those buildings. And then finally, in Reach 7, which will connect to the South Battery Park City resiliency project that I mentioned earlier, we have to take into account some more residential buildings, but also South Cove itself, which is a beautiful public art piece by Mary Miss and Stan Extit that we want to preserve while also creating resiliency. A significant challenge, to be sure, but one that we at the authority welcome. We were created to develop and maintain Battery Park City, and now that mission takes on even more significance in the face of climate change. We need to ensure that Battery Park City is built to last, and so that's what our climate adaptation measures are all about. And if you're interested in more information, I encourage you to visit our website. We have a resiliency site dedicated to our projects with recordings of all of our public meetings and public materials and designs and what have you, and hope you'll find that helpful. And now, Karen, you and I have a few minutes to have a conversation. Testing. Yep.
Testing. All right. So thank you, BJ. That was a great presentation. Good to see the work that's coming up with the northern area. So one of the questions that we were talking about is, or just some information you can impart. So as the BPCA resiliency work progresses, are there one or two, key experiences or lessons learned that you can relay to other communities or organizations that could help them as they're grappling with implementing resilient infrastructure and resilient measures?
Yeah, it's no surprise, and you've heard from other agencies today, and will later today, that this work is really significant, and it's really challenging, no matter what footprint you're dealing with. I think, for communities in particular that are contemplating this, one of the biggest challenges is that resiliency work necessarily changes the landscape as people know it. And in Battery Park City, we're very proud of the neighborhood that's been developed and the beautiful public parks that are there. But, the reality is that we have to adapt. And so that means making some changes. And that's why the community engagement I was talking about earlier is so important. We are, we have to be focused on flood protection, but we also want to be mindful of the impact on the neighborhood. And so, we have found through these community discussions and stakeholder discussions that we actually can get a lot of great input that can adjust the designs for the better, and has informed the designs, and changes have resulted from that. So what you're seeing in the final designs for the South, for example, is the result of an evolution that occurred through all of these discussions. But I would also say for communities that are looking into this is to be mindful that change it's hard, it's noisy. You have to balance a lot of needs and a lot of values. And so, there's not one solution that's going to make everybody happy. And so, you just have to do the best you can with a very difficult balancing act.
And in the northern portion, you have a lot of stakeholders. It's
yeah,
a lot of people to work around, and a lot of different environments.
Yeah, I think that's, one of the things that we realized very quickly is that, as much as this is a design and engineering feat, it really is kind of an interjurisdictional collaboration feat. And so you think about, not just, the neighborhoods, the residents and the people who work in Battery Park City, but also, as I mentioned, all of the agencies that are involved. It's not Battery Park City Authority does not have, complete autonomy over everything that happens in the neighborhood, but also because of, the nature of the resiliency getting from high point to high point, we have to go outside of Battery Park City. The good news is that means our work will protect more than Battery Park City, but there's so many agencies and other stakeholders that we have to work with to get this work done. So we get to the table together very early in the process and then constantly throughout.
Yeah, I'm thinking about that with my own project as well. So you've obviously, you're doing a lot of work, construction and landscaping for this very flood risk reduction specific climate resiliency work. But you've been doing a lot of other work since even you came on to BPCA to reduce the community's impact on the environment. So can you talk about some of the specific plans and specific things you've done and are going to do as far as sustainability?
Yeah, I mean, we're really proud of Battery Park City's green legacy, but, I think the lesson is you can't take that for granted. You always have to be thinking about the future and adapting, and, you can't just hang your hat on your legacy and talk about it in the past tense. And so just 2 years ago, we released a new sustainability plan, and in concert with that, new green guidelines, for development and, renovations in the neighborhood. And we also created a climate action plan where we looked at greenhouse gas emissions, the sources of those, and what we would need to do to reduce it to meet our goal of becoming net zero by mid-century. And so, no surprise. And we want to do that not just for the subset of spaces that the authority controls. We want to help facilitate it for the entire neighborhood and figure out how we can help align building owners with incentives, for example, because no surprise, it's, the buildings that are the biggest contributor. And so we have to figure out how we can help them with local law 97 compliance and more. But transportation and electric vehicle infrastructure is going to be a very important part of that. And so we're interested in facilitating that kind of infrastructure in the neighborhood. And also waste management is something that's been very important to us that I think doesn't get enough attention, how we've been handling it in the neighborhood with trash compacting and composting that we've done, but we've also expanded our efforts with waste reduction. So we're composting even more like dog waste, which is not glamorous, but it turns out in Battery Park City, there's a lot of opportunity there. And also, recently we got certified for our parks operations. We got certified for zero waste. And now we're going to expand that. We're endeavoring to become the first zero waste certified parks system in the country. So we really are trying to look at this from a lot of angles, not just flood protection.
So how do you think some of those ideas that you just talked about could be implemented in the city and some of the public parks? I know it's a little, different process and a different way that needs to, be worked on. But I think some of those things could be very beneficial to other public parks.
Yeah, we're mindful, I think, like in terms of green building regulations, the authority kind of set the standard, for what is now commonplace with LEED and, green building guidelines. And so, we're mindful that, our local actions can, serve as a model for other places. And I hope that, our work is helpful in that regard. And so I think, it's important to us to do what we're doing, for the neighborhood, but also hope that, people can take it and use it in, other places around the world.
It's interesting too, because even though you're, your own authority, there's a lot of people outside of the park, the BPCA or BPC that use the park. I mean, every time I get off the ferry, I'm right there. And, it's lovely walking through that area to get to other places in the city. So it is a visible thing that you can see. So following the lead of one of my bosses, Tom Pendergrass earlier, from some BPCA trivia, some of you may or may not know, and I'm going to read this so I get it right. So the Battery Park City is not even 55 years old. You can see the pictures that BJ showed earlier. And it was created by the New York State Legislature in 1968 to manage the area's development. So the first residences started to be built in 1980, but construction was just completed on the final buildings not even a decade ago. So I venture to say that urban planners and engineers, probably especially, I can say that because I am one, did in the 70s and 80s didn't even envision what it has become today with the public park and the public spaces. So with that in mind, what do you see as the BPC of the future? What do you envision for the future of Battery Park City?
Yeah, and I recognize we have to wrap up, but I would just say that, yeah, Battery Park City was not a foregone conclusion. We were created 55 years ago, but it took a long time to get it off the ground. And so in many ways, the story of Battery Park City is a story of resilience, weathering financial crises, the terrorist attacks, hurricanes, and more. And so, again, it goes back to this idea of making sure this neighborhood is built to last. And so we just have to always be focused on adapting if we're serious about that mission.
Thank you, BJ.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.